The air in the summit hall tasted like ozone and scorched carbon fiber. Warden Elias Thorne stood alone in the center of the shattered gallery, his armor melting into his skin as he raised a jagged combat knife against a dozen assassins armed with sun-killing beams. He didn't blink as the first purple bolt arched toward his chest. The galaxy is watching a lone human defy the inevitable. If you want to see how the most stubborn species in the void rewrites the rules of survival, subscribe now. Let's go back to the moment the silence broke. 10 hours earlier, the most pressing concern for Thorne had been the minor itch of a stiff dress uniform collar against his neck. As the High Archon Selene processed into the Bastion of Aegis, the sheer scale of the event felt heavy enough to crush the lungs. Standing at his post, Thorne watched the Solar Aegis, the Archon's personal guard, glide past. They were magnificent, towering beings with skin like polished opal and armor that seemed to be woven from solidified starlight. They didn't walk so much as flow, their movements synchronized by neural links that made human coordination look like the stumbling of a toddler. Beside them, Thorne felt like a relic. His kinetic breacher rifle, a heavy, blocky thing of steel and chemical propellant, hung from a two-fingered grip on his shoulder. To the Solar Aegis, he was a primitive curiosity, a representative of a species that still used explosions to push metal slugs through the air. He saw one of the elite guards glance at his rifle, a faint ripple of amber light shimmering across the alien's throat, a sign of amusement or perhaps pity. High Archon Selene herself was a vision of terrifying beauty. As she took her seat at the obsidian diplomatic table, the glow beneath her translucent skin pulsed in a slow, rhythmic violet. To Thorne, it looked like a heartbeat made of neon. During the opening litany, he caught her eyes. They weren't fixed on the holographic star charts or the delegates. She was looking at him. Her gaze lingered on the scarred, matte black finish of his rifle, her internal light flickering with an unreadable cadence. The Peace Summit was a theater of ancient lineages and sophisticated posturing. The Kthari delegates spoke of weapons that could fold space, while the Archon's ministers debated the ethics of matter manipulation. Through it all, the human contingent remained quiet, a small island of brawn and ballistic history in a sea of ethereal tech. Thorne tightened his grip on the breacher, the cold steel of the trigger guard the only thing keeping him grounded in a room that felt increasingly like a dream. Suddenly, the station's artificial gravity groaned, a sound like a mountain being ground to dust. The primary viewport didn't just crack. It dissolved. High-velocity purple energy, jagged and hungry, tore through the reinforced hull. It wasn't a bombardment. It was an erasure. The Nihil sect had arrived, and the Bastion's legendary shields hadn't even flickered before failing. The hall descended into a cacophony of shimmering light and panicked cries. Thorne saw the Solar Aegis immediately activate their personal phase shields, the starlight armor glowing blindingly bright. But as the first wave of assassins stepped through the breach, shadowy forms wrapped in void energy. The superior guards didn't form a perimeter. They calculated. In a flash of amber light, the neural link decided the Archon was a lost cause. They turned, using their advanced propulsion to blast toward the emergency shuttles, leaving their High Archon standing alone amidst the falling debris. The Nihil sect assassins moved with a terrifying liquid grace, their sun-killing beams leveling the diplomatic table in a single sweep. Selene stood frozen, her violet glow turning into a frantic, jagged stutter. Even in the face of a galactic collapse, there's always one person who refuses to move. Subscribe to find out why the assassins couldn't break the human line. Thorne didn't calculate the odds. He didn't have a neural link to tell him the percentage of survival was 0. He simply unslung the kinetic breacher and stepped into the gap. The shadow of a Nihil sect assassin loomed, its blade of violet light humming with the sound of a dying star. Thorne didn't wait for it to strike. He slammed the butt of his kinetic breacher into the creature's sternum, the impact vibrating through his marrow. He didn't have a phase shield. He didn't have a neural link to calculate his retreat. He only had the weight of the steel in his hands and the absolute irrational refusal to move. As the assassins closed in, Thorne's world narrowed to the rhythmic thud of his own heart against his ribs. And then the bridge back to the nightmare. Under the silence of the dying station, Thorn stood in the center of the shattered hall. His armor was no longer a shell. It was a ruin of slagged plates melting into his own skin. He raised the jagged combat knife, his fingers slick with his own blood, and stared down the dozen sun-killing beams leveled at his throat. The first bolt struck his shoulder, a scream of heat that should have vaporized him. Instead, he felt a sudden, freezing surge of power. High Archon Selene had moved. She wasn't fleeing. Her translucent hands were pressed hard against the small of his back, her internal violet light flaring into a blinding, rhythmic strobe. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was pouring her very essence into his nervous system, her energy turning his primitive metal armor into a conductor for the impossible. Thorn roared, the sound tearing from a throat raw with smoke. He pulled the trigger of the breacher. With Selene's energy coursing through the mechanism, the rifle didn't just fire lead. It spat bolts of white-hot kinetic fury that shattered the assassin's void envelopes like glass. A thunderous boom shook the deck, not the dissolution of a hull, but the heavy, rhythmic slam of drop shuttle boots. A human relief squad, led by a commander who had refused to leave a man behind, breached the hall. They didn't have the grace of the solar aegis. They were loud, dirty, and stubborn. They formed a wall of iron around the Warden and the Archon, their lead-spitting weapons clearing the air of purple light. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy didn't talk about the fall of the Bastion. They talked about the species that ran toward the fire when the perfect ones ran away. Thorn sat by the viewport of the new multi-species command, his hand resting on the table. The kinetic breacher sat beside him, its stock scarred and its barrel darkened by heat, but its frame remained solid. He looked at his hand, at the scarred, two-fingered grip that had once been mocked as primitive. It was no longer a sign of a lesser race. It was the silhouette of the only thing the Nihil sect couldn't dissolve, the sheer, unbreakable will to stay. Thorn looked out at the stars and felt the heavy, comforting weight of the rifle's cold steel beneath his palm. What would you sacrifice to stand your ground when everyone else runs? Subscribe to join us for tomorrow's chronicle of the humans who refused to blink.